Hi, I'm Dave. These are books. The complete title of this book is Life. It was written by Keith Richards with James Fox and was released on 26 October 2010. It's a new book. I thought a book about life by Keith Richards would be pretty interesting, and it was. The author, Keith Richards, is a guitarist, vocalist, songwriter, and co-founder of the Rolling Stones. I need to tell you that I am not now, and I have never been, a big fan of the Rolling Stones. So I came to this book as somewhat of an outsider, there being a lot I didn't know about Keith Richards and the Rolling Stones. I didn't know, for instance, that when they were just starting out, the Rolling Stones fancied themselves a Chicago blues band. In 1963, Richards dropped the S from his surname and began using the professional name Keith Richard because Rolling Stones manager Andrew Loog Oldham felt it looked more pop. He used the S-less version of his pen name and stage name until about the late 1970s. I've always wondered about that. Keith Richards and I are separated by a common language, English. This created a distance which remained throughout the book. Here's an example of how Keith talks. Quote, "What I remember most about our first gig was that we pulled a couple of birds." Unquote. Life opens with a description of getting arrested in Fordyce, Arkansas in 1975. It paints a very unflattering picture of the local folks of Arkansas, while at the same time painting an equally unflattering picture of the author and his entourage. In describing his schooling, particularly his art school training, Keith observes, quote, "I realize now that we were getting some dilapidated tail end of the noble art tradition from a pre-war period, etching, stone lithographs, classes on the spectrum of light, all thrown away on advertising Gilbey's Gin," unquote. The author shares his interesting philosophy regarding clothing and wardrobe selection, including, quote, "I would wake up and put on what was lying around. Sometimes it was mine, and sometimes it was the old lady's. But we were the same size, so it didn't matter. If I sleep with someone, I at least have the right to wear her clothes. I used to dress myself by taking clothes off other people," unquote. Mr. Richards describes how his composing and guitar playing changed when he discovered open tunings. In open tuning, the guitar is pre-tuned to a ready-made chord. Regarding drug usage, Keith cautions repeatedly that he took only the best. Quote, "But I have to impress on anyone who reads this that this was the finest cocaine and the purest heroin. This was no crap off the street, no Mexican shoe scrapings," unquote. Regarding Margaret Trudeau, wife of Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, Mr. Richards observes, quote, "She was a groupie. That's all she was, pure and simple. Nothing wrong with that, but you shouldn't be a prime minister's wife if you want to be a groupie." You may know that I'm a dog lover, that I have a soft spot in my heart for canine companions. Keith Richards shares that trait with me. Quote, "In rough times, I know I can count on canines. When the dogs and I are alone, I talk endlessly. They're great listeners. I would probably die for one," unquote. At one point, Keith Richards puts into words a feeling which I have, unfortunately, also experienced. Quote, "A lot of it was, we've got to out-punk the punks because they can't play and we can. All they can do is be punks. I love every band that comes along. That's why I'm here, to encourage guys to play and get bands together. But when they're not playing anything, they're just spitting on people. Now, come on, we can do better than that," unquote. Mr. Richards also shares some interesting observations about the differences between white America and black America based upon his own experiences. Here are some of my favorite quotes from the book. Quote, "I've never had a problem with drugs. I've had problems with the police." Quote, "And the church, organized religion, was something to be avoided. Nobody minded what Christ said. Nobody said there wasn't a God or anything like that. But stay away from organizations. Priests would be considered with much suspicion. See a bloke in a black frock? Cross the road. Mind out for the Catholics. They're even dodgier. Unquote. Quote, he has maintained a low standard, was the 6-word summary of my 1959 school report, suggesting, correctly, that I had put some effort into the enterprise. Quote, but if you want to get to the top, you have to start at the bottom. Same with anything. Quote, my parents were brought up in the Depression, when if you got something, you just kept it and you held it, and that was it. Quote, I've learned everything I know off of records. Being able to replay something immediately without all that terrible stricture of written music, the prison of those bars, those 5 lines. Being able to hear recorded music freed up loads of musicians that couldn't necessarily afford to learn to read or write music, like me. Before 1900, you've got Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, Chopin, the can-can. With recording, it was emancipation for the people. It was the emancipation of music. It surely can't be any coincidence that jazz and blues started to take over the world the minute recording started, within a few years, just like that. Quote, and the further you went back into music and time, and with the blues you go back to the 20s, because you're basically going through recorded music, you think, thank God for recording. It's the best thing that's happened to us since writing. Quote, otherwise, the stunning, overblown pretentiousness of the art world made my skin crawl cold turkey, and I wasn't even using the stuff. Quote, I have never put the make on a girl in my life. I just don't know how to do it. My instincts are always to leave it to the woman, which is kind of weird, but I can't pull the come on bit. Hey baby, how you doing? Come on, let's get it on, and all that. I'm tongue-tied. I suppose every woman I've been with, they've had to put the make on me. Quote, people say, why don't you give it up? I can't retire until I quote, croak. Let me try that one again. Quote, people say, why don't you give it up? I can't retire until I croak. I don't think they quite understand what I get out of this. I'm not doing it just for the money or for you. I'm doing it for me. Quote, when you smell trouble coming, act. Don't wait for it to start. Quote, great songs write themselves. You're just being led by the nose or the ears. The skill is not to interfere with it too much. You realize that songs write themselves. You're just the conveyor. Quote, it was just some snide, queenie remark, and sometimes I don't give a damn. Other times it just gets up my nose. Quote, to the Jamaicans, the ones that I know, I'm black, but I've turned white to be their spy, our man up north sort of thing. I take it as a compliment. I'm as white as a lily with a black heart exulting in its secret. Quote, I'm a great fire builder. I'm not an arsonist, but I am a pyromaniac. Life, by Keith Richards, contains some very accurate descriptions of the creative process, and it also contains some very honest descriptions of the life of a junkie. Some of Mr. Richards' observations are right on the money, and some are way out in left field, but I enjoyed reading this book, and I recommend it to anyone who wishes to experience a unique perspective on life. I'm Dave. The title of this book is Life. It was written by Keith Richards with James Fox. It's a new book, was released on 26 October 2010. As I said, I'm Dave. These are books.